This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat
Hello gamers. Do you want to see an even more poorly paced and written retelling of the worst parts of S.H.I.E.L.D. Hero, with even less character development, and a cardboard box as the main protagonist? Then have I got an anime for you. I'm the type of person who grew up playing Grand Theft Auto, and watching shit like South Park and Family Guy.
How filthy.
That's because I'm of the belief that sometimes including some controversial elements, especially when it comes to things you can't undo, can sometimes be funny.
Psych!
However, in a harem of a labyrinth of another world, hereby referred to as Labyrinth, including slavery, specifically sex slavery, doesn't make it much better. In fact, it kind of exasperates some of the problems that it already had before the inclusion of these things. And I'd like to tell you why. If this interests you, then let's begin. Before we go into the deeper issues regarding its pacing, the lack of character development, and the fact that the show doesn't really know what fucking genre it wants to be, let's go into
the plot?
Don't you just love it when a kiss is so scandalous in a
Mature rated anime.
that Crunchyroll censors it? I mean, I saw it in World's End Harem, so I'm not really surprised, but it doesn't make it any less stupid. That's basically how all the sex scenes are, but we'll get into that. The fact that Michio fucks Roxanne on multiple occasions should not be news to you, especially if you clicked on this video. The funniest thing is though, this is the only thing that sets this protagonist apart from other isekai protagonists. And yet, you can only see essentially what looks like getting a virus in the early 2000s looked like, with a bunch of hentai noises.
What is it? What is it? No, it's a fish!
But, at least based off of the noises they're making, you know they both came, which is always good. Episode 4 illustrates all this perfectly, and it really affects the scenes leading up to the heavily censored sex. Every time Roxanne and Michio are alone, the show wants it to be sweet and cute, and for you to have like romantic music in the background, but it really comes off as fucking creepy. Roxanne looks like she's about to break down in tears, and Michio might as well have a shadow over his fucking eyes. They have no history together or chemistry, and due to the dubious nature of the relationship, Roxanne can't say no to any of his advances. And the thing is, the show makes sure that you know this. It tries to brush it aside, but I don't know, like it handles it extremely poorly. This makes the various times where Michio caresses her or touches her or says sweet nothings into her ear extremely awkward, and it never really goes away, especially when you think about it too much. The 4th episode is filled with these scenes leading up to the pre-sex bathing, and the awkwardness never really subsides. The sex itself is your typical I'll look away while you do what you need to do, and even the post-sex kiss is tarnished by the fact that even Michio doesn't know if she kissed him because he told her to or because she wanted to. For people who came to see the sex scenes, the worst part is only the first sex scene in the entire show is detailed. From this point onward, excluding maybe 1 or 2 episodes, you either get a fade out or a bunch of pop-ups with hentai noises in the background. If the sex scenes are all you came for, you're gonna have to go to like a dubious site that might give you a fucking virus to watch it uncensored. And if you're not willing to take that risk, you have to ask the question, is the plot at least good? I'm gonna tell you right now.
Look, maidenless.
On its surface, a harem in a labyrinth of another world seems interesting. Rather than making the main character a slime or a demon king, the main character is just some dude who wants to get some bitches on his dick. And the execution really ruins it. Rather than developing Michio as a main character, the first episode focuses on clarifying things you need to be okay with because of the things Michio is going to do, and the main motivation he's going to have for the first 3 episodes. Basically, it's kind of a vibe check. If you don't fuck with some of the things that are okay in this world, and don't want to see a protagonist that doesn't give a fuck about the more terrible things that happen in it, then this show is just not for you. And even if you look past it, it's still not good enough to continue, but we'll get into that. After entering the digital world, Michio finds himself in a bale of hay in a peaceful village. Soon after he gets his bearings and finds the weapon that he most likely got by either downloading the DLC or fucking being a beta tester or something, bandits attack the village, and of course he jumps in to defend the village. Not because he actually gives a fuck about the village, but because, well, he kills. Just like a generic male protagonist would. After protecting the village from the bandits, Michio is taken to a room to wash up and change his clothes by the village chief. Here, Michio attempts to save and quit, but finds out that he can't, making him stuck in this game. A flashback shows us that the reason Michio got here is because he clicked yes on a prompt, which made it very clear that there's no going back to Earth once you say yes. Michio believes, being that he's stuck here, this is his new reality. And as such, the bandits he killed were real people, and not just pixels on a screen. The problem with this entire scene is that he feels bad about it for 10 seconds, and then within the next scene, he cognitively reframes it and basically says, well, it was either them or me, and he just kind of moves on. But that's a key thing to know about Michio. He thinks that the people around him are people. So everything he does from this point, I'd like you to keep that in mind. After this, the village chief brings Michio to a shed where he examines the loot that he got from the bandits. And he looks for a bandana called the thief's bandana, because of course it's fucking called that, but only finds a regular bandana. When Michio discovers this, he lets the chief know that one piece of the loot is missing. After some investigating, the chief brings back the man who switched out the bandanas and asks Michio how he should be punished. Michio tells the chief that the thief should be punished based off of whatever norms they go by. So, the village chief changes the thief's title to slave, meaning that thief is now a slave, which Michio's kind of annoyed by, but he just kind of brushes it off and says, well, sucks to suck, and moves on. But, aside from the fact that this is the hero we all deserve, considering what happens later in the show, and the original name for the show, a slave harem in a labyrinth in another world, you kind of need to be okay with it. After the village chief takes Michio into town to sell his loot and the thief, and everything and everybody is sold, the slave trader who bought the thief makes Michio an offer for a female slave named Roxanne. After Michio cognitively reframes the purchase of a slave, being he just sold a slave technically, they move on to discussing logistics. During this scene, the slave trader takes time to explain that while a slave can betray their master, they'd only be able to live life as a bandit, and we all know that those fuckers don't have rights, so that's fun. We're also told that though she is a slave, Roxanne does consent to sex with her master, and that her species can't get pregnant from a human. The discussion ends with Michio being given 5 days to acquire the funds to purchase Roxanne at the agreed upon discounted amount. And with this, Michio has his only goal, the only goal we've known him to have since he first got here. And this is his only motivation until the end of episode 3 when he finally buys Roxanne. Moreover, another thing we learn about Michio, this shining king of what it is that everybody should be, is that he's not above killing people. As in, though his justification for killing the bandits was, well, it was them or me, he straight up murders these motherfuckers because basically there's no consequences for doing it. The show makes sure that you know that there's nothing that can happen to you if you kill bandits. So he literally does some research, stalks some people, and then finds out where these fuckers live, and then kill them in cold blood and fucking mutilate their corpses, so that he can collect the bounties on them because he needed that money. So, let's recap what we know about Michio in the 3-episode test. He was sent to this new world after selecting yes to a prompt in a computer game, even though it said he would not be able to leave the game. In this world, while believing that these are people and not pixels, he sold a man into slavery, killed and mutilated bandits in their sleep, and bought a slave girl to fuck and use as a meat shield. I mean, it's an alright synopsis for a hentai, especially because most of the time it mainly focuses on showing sex scenes, but it doesn't really translate to an interesting show. And being that the sex scenes are what they are, all that's left is the aesthetics and the plot to discuss. So, are they any good? It should be obvious by now the world Michio is in isn't very bright, and it's not very fun. And the animation kind of reflects that. The anime only focuses on having good animation and character design when Roxanne is on screen, usually wearing something tight or getting groped or fucked. The funny thing is, I'm not even a stickler for animation or drawing quality, mostly because I have no experience in the field, and one of my favorite animes of all time has scenes that look like this. I only mention it because there's nothing else to focus on. The rest of the world, much like Michio's dialogue in the first 3 episodes, are only there to wave away any moral conundrums. The world outside of its rules is fucking boring because every background is either a shade of gray, brown, with splashes of green, or just a general canvas that you barely know what it is because it has so little detail. The characters look like they're always perpetually with a green screen behind them, and as the show goes on, you start to realize the action scenes aren't very interesting to look at either. So, well, I've mostly been talking about the first 3 episodes. Do the later episodes matter? Let's see. It becomes clear that Labyrinth doesn't know what it wants to be. Episode 5, 6, and 7 focus on reminding you that this is a fantasy anime with a labyrinth in it, in case you forgot, with the pacing of a slice of life anime and the dialogue of any other harem anime, especially one in a fantasy world. There's a minor debacle involving Michio protecting the slave trader from a group of bandits, but you don't really see anything that happens. And the only action there is Michio killing a bandit using an overpowered as fuck spell that causes him to lose so much MP that he almost passes the fuck out. In the second half of episode 7, Michio pays to get transported to the first new place we've seen thus far, the Imperial City. But do we get to see that? No, we see like one scene and then he's like, alright, take me somewhere else. So they go to a place called like Kortar or whatever. And that's it. Him and Roxanne fuck, and that's the end of the episode. Episode 8 is about the most absolute sexiest thing two adults could ever do.
Buying a house.
And furniture. There's some fucking scenes thrown in, but aside from those, by this point, if you haven't gotten it by now, this show really wants to hammer in the fact that it does not give a fuck about its pacing. And episode 9 just really, like, in case you weren't paying attention because you were too focused on the fuck scenes, it just makes it so that it's right there and there's no way to avoid it anymore. Episode 9 is mainly about Michio farming. And buying a bathtub and taking a bath with Roxanne, because of course this show needed a quasi pool / beach episode. And as of this recording, that's it so far. I sincerely think it is not going to get any better than this. I don't think it's gonna get any more interesting. I think this is about as good as it's gonna get. Though I left some details out, mostly revolving around needless world building and some shit involving titles and Michio's abilities, which he only ever uses like once during boss fights, and the only skill he like constantly uses is water wall. By now you should see that this show doesn't really know what it wants to be, and whenever it tries to do something, it does it poorly. Some episodes feel like they want to be an action anime, except they don't really have any action in it. Others feel like they want to be a fantasy slice of life anime, where it explores the world, except they don't really have any detail in that world. They don't really develop the characters or the relationships. It must be noted that the anime moves much faster than the manga or the light novel, but that's not saying much. And the fact that it's one of the shows with harem in its title, and the main character only has one girl nearing the end of the first core, should tell you just how slow the pacing is. Overall, when you strip away the controversial elements of a love interest who is a slave to the main character and the sex scenes, there's not much to a harem in a labyrinth of another world. I checked this anime out because of the controversy, because it worked with Uzaki-chan, World's End Harem, and to some extent interspecies reviewers. It worked with those animes, so I thought it would work with this one, but dear God was I wrong. I think the most frustrating thing is it could have been interesting, but there are so many issues within the show regarding its pacing and the writing that there's not much here. If they had taken some time to develop Michio by himself and Michio and Roxanne's relationship before they actually had sex or met or something, maybe it could have been better. But even with all of that, the fact that the anime doesn't know what it wants to be really hurts it. My point is that a harem in a labyrinth of another world is fucking trash, on a level which pushes past normal puritanism, on a very deep-seated level. It is trash, and you should not waste your time. If you want to watch an anime this season that moves quickly, has rules, that has consequences for the main character, and has much more interesting and visually appealing fights, go check out Black Summoner. Thank you for listening to me ramble.